Today we have two interesting guests, co-founders and founders of Coinrule. Gentlemen, I'd love to learn a little bit more about Coinrule. I'd love for you guys to introduce yourselves.
Hi guys, it's Gabriel here, Gabriele Musella, co-founder and CEO of Coinrule. A little bit about Coinrule. Coinrule is a smart assistant for cryptocurrency traders. We help people build automatic strategies and then run them on your favorite exchange.
Hi, and I'm Oleg Gabriele. I'm also co-founder and CEO of Coinrule.
So, how did you two get into cryptocurrency? That's probably the most pressing first question that comes to people's minds.
Yeah, for me, it was in 2012. I was in Boston working. It was at MIT first when I heard first Bitcoin. And then I went to Northeastern University to work there in a research lab. And and I just started playing around with Coinbase and I bought some Bitcoin. And that's how I got into it. And then I sold them and I got a very good 6%, 6% increase and gain that was very low at that time.
Sure.
And then I went back in 2015, actually 16. I went back just to check my Coinbase account, and I saw that there was another coin, Ethereum. And then I just started buying, and I found myself in the 2016 bubble, and then when actually I made quite good returns. And that's when I got in love with cryptocurrencies, and then I went down to study blockchain, decentralization, DLTs, and all the fundamentals of the new finance that is about to come.
And in my case, so I was always interested in, like, let's say, the concept of private currencies, decentralized banking, etc. And I was coming out of a job in the banking industry, so I had been working at Citibank in London. I had quit to build my first startup and suddenly found myself with more opportunity to really engage in the tech community and started going to events, started to talk to people about it. And at some point it just clicked, it blew my mind and I couldn't stop reading everything about crypto, talking to people, writing about it. And here I am still 3-4 years later, still in the space.
So one thing I found in articles trying to research both of you was a direct quote where you say decentralization and tokenization will revolutionize the way by which we manage personal finances as well as the way we buy and sell any assets. How did you come to that consensus? That's a direct quote as well. I'm paraphrasing.
What was the quote? Was it mine or Oleg's quote?
That was yours.
Oh, it's mine. Okay, wow, that's cool. That's cool. No, I mean, I really believe in that. Actually, the concept that what the digital industry brought first was actually no more middlemen, direct consumer to business relations, and now that's happening also in finance and in banking. The idea that you need to give money to someone, and then you need to actually go to the ATM machine to get cash out and pay someone because you are getting back your own money. That has always been absurd for me. Now, an absurd concept. I'm paying someone to keep my money with them, and then I cannot access them. So with the decentralization and blockchain, potentially everyone will have a bank in their pockets. Everyone can have their own wallet. They can connect their own wallet to whatever device, infrastructure, platform, or banks they want. And they can actually plug in and trade their money, or they can actually do any transaction. That's also the case with the blockchain. It's all transparent, so it will be not just the evil banks controlling your data and having actually an overview of what's really happening in the world. Everyone will have view of what's happening in terms of flows of money going left and right around the globe. In terms of decentralization as well, that's just a need. Because the first internet was built on centralized database, and now we got these 4 or 5 giants colonizing all the aspects of our privacy and our data life. With decentralization, basically internet will be invincible, and it will be much more resilient, especially nowadays where a cyber attack, a cyber war could be just like as normal as a pandemic. So decentralization will bring that into play. And there are also the concept of the new DeFi world coming on. They are also very interesting. But it's good that we are kind of decomposing, destructuring the world of finance as a young generation, as the millennials, and now we are rebuilding step to step. So a lot of times when I talk with some colleagues in the crypto space, they come and they maybe they discovered something like they say like, oh look, I have this new account, people can put money in, and then we do this and we do that, and we give them back 2% every month. And I was like, yes, that's what's called usually a saving account. So sometimes they just come back and they invent the same stuff, but they add a little bit of twist on it, or sometimes they just invent a new model or new mechanism that really helps people managing the money.
So one of the main concerns, I guess, people have with the notion of us moving to maybe a cashless society is the fear that your governments, the dictators, so to speak, could restrict your cash flow, restrict your access to finance. And Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in general is somewhat of a solution to this problem based upon its decentralized nature. What's actually very interesting to see is where, the stock markets have been taking a pounding, like oil reached its lowest it's ever been in its history. And if we look at like Bitcoin, for example, we're actually seeing some stability over the last like 14 or so days in its actual value. Do you think there's any correlation between the two?
Let me respond to that. I would say to some extent, yes, absolutely. I think if at this point of its life, Bitcoin would not be standing up as a somewhat decorrelated asset compared to traditional markets, we would really have to wonder if it's really serving the purpose that it was designed to be, a form of digital gold. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is this is Bitcoin was invented at the high point of the last financial crisis. This is the first time that Bitcoin and also, of course, other cryptos are going through really a huge new crisis. So to see how they will hold up was a big question mark. Today, like roughly a bit more than 10 years after Bitcoin was created, we're still at the stage of its life where it's seen by most of the market as a risk asset. And in a financial crisis, people get rid of the risk assets and hold cash. They hold US dollar, etc. So we've seen a bit of that. I mean, obviously, the price of Bitcoin in mid-March dropped from like around 8,000 to about 4,000 or 5,000 briefly. What happened was that just everyone panicked. I mean, even gold at the time actually crashed. What was important was to see the recovery of it. And that's exactly what you said. Actually, Bitcoin has bounced back relatively well. And just even as oil was taking an absolute trashing yesterday, Bitcoin was actually holding its price levels. So that's extreme. Like for me, this is a very, very positive long-term sign that there is a recognition in the market that Bitcoin is becoming a form of digital gold.
So in terms of like adoption, so most, you can't quite mention it, millennials tend to be the earliest demographics to adopt to new ways by which we engage, interact with the world. I've been fortunate enough to have friends who essentially all my knowledge of cryptocurrency came from Reddit. And I learned about cryptocurrency relatively early. And I was fortunate enough in that 2015 or 2016, 17 bubble to invest not only into Bitcoin and Ethereum, also into some other tokens, preferably was it ETH20? And I managed to make, I put, let's say, 10 or so thousand pounds in, and I made a nice return, of which, I splurged most of it like an idiot, like young 20-something-year-old would. But it was quite interesting to me to see how I could, in essence, take this money that I've earned in a formal employment, put it into somewhere online, and then in 6 months, I see a crazy return, probably more aggressive return than I would see in the stock market. So the question I have, I guess, is when do we see wider adoption from millennials and then ultimately the boomer generation? Do you see that being something that's happening within maybe the next 5 or so years?
I think it will take time. It's like there's like few elements. So the first element is actually when we talk about millennials. Actually, now millennials are old, so it's like people between 30 to 40 years old, and it's good. It's good news because they actually use fintech product because they actually have savings now. So that's good. So now the new generation, the younger one, they will start probably using some sort of tokens or coins applied to some video games, applying to some other like software that is being developed on the new web. So with the kitties, with the Ethereum kitties and other programs like that, or for example with the coins that you can use in Fortnite, you can actually see that's happening. So, but I think to reach that level where several coins will be used in almost all the services online, we'll need at least 10 to 20 years. It's really, if you think about the internet took like 40 years to actually then pervade all our aspects of life. I think finance as well. It will take at least another 20 years to kind of go everywhere. But then you will start thinking about coins that are interoperable between them, each other, and you can basically trade also across platforms, across blockchains, and it will all be compatible. That's an element that will come as well, but it will take time.
So I think
just maybe to just quickly to add to that point, there will be different cycles of adoption. And they will most likely also happen differently than we expected. For example, I was just reading the other day, there are the first corporate bonds being issued on the Ethereum blockchain. So you can check, you have traders checking on their Bloomberg terminals for corporate bonds issued on Ethereum. Like that's not something like if this had happened in 2017, the price of Ethereum would have jumped to 5,000. Everyone would have gone crazy. Today, this happens. People don't really notice it. So it's kind of like it's happening slowly, and I think most of the adoption is, let's say, it's still far from really reaching retail because too much of the interfaces are still very complex. That's actually something we're trying also to address with Coinrule. It's really still complex products. Now, what's happening is that a lot of the stuff out there now today is purely financial. So you have DeFi, for example. You have a small group of really like coders of some funds. They know how to navigate those markets. And a lot of it, we don't even really have an idea yet of what kind of things will ultimately be built on it. So when the internet was created, no one would have predicted that Facebook and mobile phone apps will drive massive adoption. And I think a lot of it will be similar in this space. There will be things that will drive adoption. We're not even thinking about them just yet.
Sure. So in terms of traffic, I'll probably preference this by explaining a little bit more about why my question is coming into play. So I have some family who are, internationally based in Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana to be exact, and in Kenya also. And there was M-Pay, which was a method by which people could send payment across Africa for goods and services. And we're seeing, like, my cousin right now has a cryptocurrency platform why they are set up and running is the lack of access to bank accounts for the majority of users. So the question I would ask is, are we seeing earlier adoption in different parts of maybe the world? Are we seeing any regional correlations, or are we just seeing, generally speaking, like slow adoption, like globally?
Oleg, you want to go for this one?
Yeah, sure. So one thing I would say, there's definitely a lot of regional differences. I remember like 2 years ago, I was traveling in Southeast Asia, and people that I would meet in places like Singapore, Indonesia, had a significantly more natural understanding of the concept of cryptocurrencies. Like when I speak with people in the UK, when I speak with people in Western Europe, there's still a lot of this like doubts and what is this magic internet money? Whereas countries where people still remember what it's like to have volatile fiat currencies in their own country, or places where people just don't really rely on the currency being around in, let's say, 5 to 10 years time. For them, it's much more normal that there will be changes in, let's say, currency systems, also payment systems. Now, what we are seeing at Coinrule right now, for example, is a lot of our users are coming from places like Brazil, Nigeria, Indonesia, Turkey, where people are aspirational. People don't necessarily have the same access to investment opportunities as someone in London or New York has. And we're loving this trend. Like this is a technical revolution that potentially is not just being driven by, let's say, Silicon Valley, but it's actually has the potential to be genuinely global. You have crypto companies coming up from every corner of the world. And that's for me like one of the most exciting parts of what's going on here.
Awesome. So as cryptocurrency founders, with this coronavirus situation taking place, I'd like to ask you two questions. One, how are you two finding remote working, especially being a tech-based platform? And secondly, are we seeing any differences to maybe usual transactions or going through the platform based upon this current pandemic?
Well, for us, it's actually a great time because, funny enough, people is at home. People are doing a lot of paperwork, admin work, and they happen also to trade. So in the last 2 months, we had an increment of 30% in terms of traffic. We had many more signups. People are buying paid plans. So we're actually growing very well in these last 2 months. And so it's very good news for us. And then in terms of remote working, our team is very international. So we have an headquarters in London, and then we have a tech team based in Czech Republic because our third co-founder, Zenek, CTO, he sits there. He was in London and now he's in the nice city called Pilsen. That is actually the city where they make the nice beer, the Pilsner. So he's there. He doesn't drink too much, but he's building. He has a very nice tech team down there. And then we have also 2 employees, one in Ukraine, one in Lithuania. So in essence, we all always work remotely since when we started. So for us, really, the way we work hasn't changed a lot. We have stand-ups, we have proper agile process every morning. We meet in the chat everyone. We have product planning on Tuesday. So we have our ceremonies, during the week with our team, and we already have all the processes for remote working. So to be honest, I would say like really the crisis hasn't affected too much the company, and actually the numbers are going up. So in that regard, yeah, the virus was a good thing.
I like that. Another question I'd like to ask is, so quite typically we have young people with these amazing business ideas, and they tend to struggle with the technical execution of them, i.e. like being like myself, maybe you have an amazing idea and you don't have the technical know-how to do so. How did you, first of all, I know all 3 of you met a mass challenge, but how did you know that maybe, your CTO was a CTO for you? And how did you, all 3 of you, realize that, hey, like we complement each other and we have the correct skill sets to take Coinrule from ideation to market and much, much further beyond?
Okay, that's a big question. We can talk here for like a few days probably about that. Usually what no one really says in the startup world is that you need a lot of luck. You need to be lucky to actually meet the right co-founders. There are not many out there, so there's a lot of people that want to do side project, but then when it's actually the time to jump off and say like, yeah, leave your 9-to-5 job and come full time to the startups, and maybe the startup is not yet well funded, then a lot of people drop off, and it's like, oh wait, I was joking, or maybe they don't want to put money down to start, a company. So that's actually meeting a co-founder is the hardest thing, more than meeting the love of your life probably, and that also means that finding a good CTO, it's almost impossible. So CTOs are super requested nowadays. So when you find one, it's just a trial and error. You can have, a few months where you try each other to build the first mock-up or MVP, and that already tells you, where is the commitment if you match as a co-founder. So there is not really the right answer. The only thing is just if you are a non-technical founder, it's your job to actually bring the money in the company. So don't expect some tech guy to work for free for you for 6 months, 1 year. So you actually need to pay him. And then on top of that, maybe he can get a cut on his wage, and then give, you can give him some equities, and then eventually can become your CTO. So basically, the burden of the start in terms of financial, in terms of finding the right people, is on the non-technical founder that can take care of the business and marketing, and then the CTO will follow, because the CTO wants to see your commitment. He wants to see your part of work in terms of financial projection, in terms of mocking up the first design, in terms of user research, getting the feedback. And when you've seen all that humus of work, then he actually, you can convince him to join you, with a very low salary, with equities, and then he will start working with you. But just like I see a lot of young people that never did any entrepreneurial journey, to actually come in and say to tech people, why don't you work for me for 6 months on this project, without having done then homework first? And that's typical. That doesn't work.
I mean, you just described me to some degree.
Okay, sorry about that.
AJ, and just to add from our own story, so it's also quite interesting, because I had left my job to start my first startup. I was initially, we were two business founders, then eventually found a friend who joined us as CTO, joined Mass Challenge. And then, as you said, in Mass Challenge, Gabriele, Zdenek, and myself, the three of us met. And each one of us has a different story I know Gabriele has a story of how I was chasing him for the first 2 months of the program, because I wanted to kind of talk to him about a few things. But at the same time, Zdenek and me, we actually became friends. He had just moved to London for the Mass Challenge program. He literally arrived in London with £50 in his pocket. Never been to London before. He was living in a hostel. He was basically writing code for that hostel to stay there for free. So proper hustler. Wow. And all of us were doing other projects. And actually, Zdenek was at one point asking me to join him as a marketing co-founder. And then I stopped my first company, and then with Gabriele we started Coinrule, and then we asked later Zdenek to join us. So it's been really a journey. Like, there's been so much back and forth before we really opened together.
And actually, before Zdenek, we had two other co-founders. So there is like a bit of story there as well.
So we tend to see
a relationship that didn't work well.
So let's spend some time on that. So founder fallouts, especially in those early stages. So without going into too much detail, because I think privacy is relatively important. Those two earlier CTOs, why didn't they work?
So what happened? Okay, the first one was I will say he had like other plans, and he was more focused. He was very young. He was 22. He was very, very smart, very talented, but he had some conflict of interest, and also he didn't have enough time for us, because he was doing other things at the same time. So that's a typical scenario. That was the first one. Then the second one was basically someone that we started paying as a tech lead, and we wanted him to become a CTO, but actually he never became. And then we also had, actually I just forgot, we also had another guy that is a friend of mine, very nice guy, but he only lasted 1 month, because again, he had a super well-paid consultant job in a big bank, and then he wanted to do some startup. After a month, he realized that he cannot really leave that very lucrative contract to come with us for 1 year with no income. So, there's always that moment. And even among ourselves, the way we switched from a well-paid, monthly cash flow to the actual full-time startup work, it was not so easy. It was also, I think I was the first, then Oleg was the second, and we had like a big chat about it. I don't know if you Oleg remember.
Yeah, for sure. Because we had a big opportunity to join an accelerator that was giving us some money, but obviously it's a big decision to make at that point, because it wasn't really enough money to carry us too far, but there was the possibility of follow-up funding. Sure. So there was kind of the trade-offs to evaluate there.
I remember we kind of held an emergency meeting, something at like 11 p.m., 11 o'clock at night in a pub, me and him, to discuss about this.
Yes.
It was very, very interesting time. And then after that, also Zdenek came time,
So regards to friends and business, or friends as co-founders, and it doesn't quite work out, how did that conversation go? How's that relationship, apologies, been since? Because I've had this issue before where you have, a member of the team who you're working on alongside with a project. Things are going well, you're getting traction. Now it's the time when you realize, oh, wow, this is actually commercially viable. Now we need to kind of, focus on, saving some of our income from our 9-to-5 job and funnel it into this. And times of friends, they haven't necessarily had that commitment, and it's just led for very difficult, awkward conversations. And in most cases, the relationships have been, strained as a result.
The lucky part with us was that we were already we met as a startup people. Mm-hmm. We met as a colleague, and then we became friends eventually, very good friends. But Oleg, what would you say?
Yeah, I would add. I've been actually very lucky in that regard. I'm still friends with all my previous co-founders. It's kind of like staying friends with your ex. If it works, it's great, and you're proud that you can make it work. But it's always like a fine line, and there's always difficulties. Like I think the fact that we all behaved, relatively straightforwardly and honestly with each other, I think that's the main thing. And things get ugly when there is kind of misaligned understandings and expectations, and then people try to change things retrospectively, and that's when things start to get ugly usually. But luckily, we avoided all of that.
There is one very, very simple rule that it's very, very basic, but everyone forgets. It's about just being transparent and honest, and just express your feelings, good or bad, in a very rational way, objective way. And I think, by talking, you can solve any issue.
I like that. So I'd like to maybe spend some time on life prior to Coinrule. And I'll start with you, Oleg. So you mentioned before, banker at Citi. So I don't quite know how the banking hierarchy goes. However, I do know that going from analyst to assistant VP in like 2 or 3 years seems very, 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 very quick, and to be placed on the top category of all analysts. So I'm very curious, how did you manage to do that? What separated you from all those analysts? What allowed you to be promoted so rapidly?
That's an interesting question that brings me back to kind of the earlier days of my career. It was a funny story because I joined banking, and actually I had studied politics, international relations. Mm-hmm. So my background totally wasn't in finance. We actually did, before we joined the analyst program, we did like a placement test. Mm-hmm. I finished out of 81 people, I finished the 79th at the bottom because, Of course, I had never studied finance. I had absolutely not the slightest clue of a lot of those things. But the reality is that actual work in a bank has very little to do with what you are learning in a finance degree. I had a lot of interest for everything going on in the economy. I had a lot of interest for everything going on in the world in general. I had a very analytical mind. I quickly figured out financial models, some basics of accounting and reading financial statements. So all that worked. But then what really helped me to kind of, let's say, do very well was that I was very good in kind of navigating the place. Like I knew when to put in the extra mile. I knew like kind of how to, let's say, make friends, etc. Mm-hmm. I was a pretty like smooth operator in that role. And actually so as you said, I ended up in my first year being ranked in the top group of analysts, which for me, I found pretty spectacular. Sure. Because I literally, like, for the first 6 months of me doing my job, I had very little clue of what I was doing. But the main thing, what I was trying to convey to people later is all of it is not it's really not rocket science. It's more kind of a combination of how much you're willing to go the extra mile, how detail oriented you are, and how smooth you are in actually fitting into this weird tribe that is bank hierarchy. Then in the final step, the way I moved from analyst to AVP was that I actually changed teams. So I was in the corporate bank, and I then joined, I became like a form of chief of staff to Citi's global head of public sector risk. So he was one of the most senior people in the bank. So very, very, very senior guy. He had been in the bank over 40 years. We were a team of 3 people supporting him. supporting him in managing this global portfolio. And of course, he had a lot of power in, pushing promotions, etc. And of course, like, he was a very interesting person. I really enjoyed actually working with him. Obviously, like, a ton of experience, and that's what kind of helped me to get to that role, relatively quickly.
Okay, and Gabriele, so from being in UX to product and spending quite a lot of your time in product, I have to ask you, what about product has fascinated you so much?
That's a good question, actually. One thing I want to say also about Oleg, the funny thing is that Oleg, whenever we have an office, he becomes friends with all the bodyguards of the office, like all the guards and all the people in the lobby, because you think that these are like very important people in emergency time. and actually it's true, because then we found ourselves in a situation with the Primal Base that was this beautiful office in Margate on the 32nd floor, top of level 39, type of office, beautiful, all with crypto companies. And at some point, actually, this company, Primal Base, went bankrupt. So we go to work. There was a kind of Merrill Lynch crisis scenario, people walking out to the boxes. And since Oleg knew actually the guard, we were able to actually get something back from our office. It was a very interesting scenario. It happened actually this year. It was this year was kind of crazy for us. It was interesting. And so Oleg says a lot of good tips for networking. It's very good to it. I call him the human CRM, because he knows everyone and he remembers the names of everyone. So it's very good at that. And coming back to product, that's a funny question everyone asks me. Actually, at university, I did design and computer science. I always wanted to be someone creating new digital propositions. I went to study at Media Lab in Helsinki, in Finland, and also at MIT, I worked in a research lab doing that. So actually, I've studied that at any level in terms of academia. And then I moved. My first job was actually I built a trading platform in UBS. It's called UBS Neo. It was supposed to compete with Bloomberg. I think now it's the third biggest platform in the world in terms of trading derivatives. And so, since then, I always worked for banks, for innovation labs, trying to make life more easier for consumers. Having a design background in every terms, I started from architecture. I went to actually typography, interior design, product design, UI, user interface. I really understand how to shape reality from user needs, what people want to actually something that is usable, actionable. So that's always been the case. And in London, I always consulted with a lot of banks and also with agencies. And at some point, I just did this bug of startup. So actually, this is my third startup. It was not my first. It was already generating some revenues, but I didn't like it. It was in the fashion business. The second one failed because the team was not the right one. We had some disagreement with CTO again, and there were a lot of hurdles. But we had like a lot of kind of brand equities. So actually, the startup was victim of too much brand awareness around. But that's good because we got invited to a lot of events, and people always thought that we were much bigger than what we were. And thanks to that, I got to meet Mark Carney or Philip Hammond and a lot of very good people that then, helped us also in terms of understanding the landscape. In fact, with my previous company, I was part of the FCA sandbox, and that's what also we plan to do with the Coinrule. It was a very interesting pattern. So I started from design, I went to computer science to work for banks, to the research at MIT, and then I came back to the UK because I felt I was missing Europe. The cultural the cultural level that we have in Europe, the narrative here is much more, I think, democratic and leveled. In the US, if you have good income, you really feel like in a bubble. And it's an amazing life. But when you start thinking that you live in a country that has a specific aspect, like a belligerent country or with no welfare, then you start understanding that all the lady Europe and the UK actually has a lot of value in terms of work culture, in terms of also society, and also what's your role in that context. So that's why I came back, so I would say, like, to build a startup, if you also are able to consult or to have a contract job that you can land on every time you have a moment of crisis in the startup, that's very, very valuable. So if you have a specialization, if you are a developer, designer, a business analyst, whatever you are, and you can go back and forth from startup to contracting, that's a mine gold. a gold mine, really, because you have in startups some moments when you are between fundraisers, so you need that extra few £1,000, or maybe you want to employ the next developer, that finally you found it's perfect, and still you're waiting for the last check from the investors. So that's very, very important.
So we're in a very interesting space where there's been a nice transition from like a very sales-driven approach to startup growth to right now product being king, product and user interface and things of that nature. And I've noticed it too from some platforms, like for example, Dropbox are so seamless, even like, shameless plug, Seed Legals. So I've used it before prior to my employment with the company. So seamless to use that, it really just blows apart the competition. And we're seeing like many companies like scale based upon the product, how in-depth the founding team have thought about that new user and also old user experience. So I'm very curious doesn't necessarily need to be in-depth, maybe a high-level overview from this, having an idea of Coinrule to the whole process of mapping out what that user journey, what that new customer journey looks like. What are the things at which you're looking at as key elements to make that onboarding process as smooth as possible?
That's a very good question. Oleg, you want to answer to this?
I can start, and then I'll pass on to Gabriele, because of course he also has a lot of experience in that. I mean, one, let's say, starting point for us has been to identify the user need. I mean, everything that we do as a company, and I think this is it's been a growing trend, let's say, in tech, product, any type of startup environment, to really zoom in on understanding what is the user problem, what is the user need, and then build small experiments with which you can validate if your proposed solution is going to actually address that need. So that's the first thing, and this is something that we are doing very religiously at Coinrule. We interview every day, we interview users, we collect feedback, we identify the journeys and the funnels on which the users travel through the application, and then try to really come up with ways to address that. Now, I mean, of course, this is the ideal case. In practice, especially you're a small team, everyone is, under pressure, etc. So sometimes you have to be quicker than, let's say, a big company with hundreds of people who can really run like proper teams just working on these type of things. So as a startup, you sometimes have to improvise these things. Now, with us, we're a very, let's say, design-driven company. We don't just release things. We actually think through from A to Z how something works, how it looks, how the user interacts with it. Does it make sense for the user? And only then do we build it. Gabriele, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, so basically I'm the watchdog on this user experience and design. So when it comes to reviewing the front end and design, and if that matches with actually the user research that we did, that's everyone hates me in the company when I do that. But it's very important because we have a mix of, we have several funnels where we gather quantitative and qualitative data. So as Oleg was saying, every day we do on average 1 hour interview with our users. So we talk to them, and we systematically categorize the feedback, and we put them in specific category with user needs that get solutionized in a big dashboard, and then get actually wireframe the design and then implement. So it's a very long process that we do in kind of cycles. Every 2 months, we do one cycle of 2 weeks of user research, and that's very important. And then we have a lot of quantitative data coming from the surveys, from the newsletters, from other sources as well. So we have all this incoming data that we need to make sense of. Now, when people start like a project or website and stuff, they are shy, right? They're super shy. They don't want to talk. Most of the people, especially the marketing and sales people, the one that should go out and talk to the customer, do focus group, do card sorting, use all sorts of techniques that you can use in user research. They actually don't do that. They just think like, oh, just go there and sell the product. But actually selling the product, what it means? It means just understanding what the person who he is, what's their needs, and then saying like, look, if you want, there is a solution for your problem. So that's very, it's like treating your customer with respect because they have a brain. They don't want to just get pushed on them, especially in the new version of marketing where it's more indirect, more reactive than proactive. So So doing that, I see that a lot of people, especially the one that come from a typical corporate background or 9-to-5 job, they're just shy. They're not like they don't cut through the crowd. They just sit there and they just build something based on assumption. It's good to have an assumption to start with, but then you need to validate or invalidate that assumption. Okay, so the idea that everyone has that Steve Jobs was a visionary, that's false. It's not true. He had the first vision. He had few vision, but then there were like tons of people validating or invalidating that vision, and that's also why some product failed, probably because maybe he was just stubborn. He wanted to push for it, and then the market was not there. So the idea that someone is cool and he actually has telepathic powers that can read the mind doesn't really exist. It's a mix of quantitative and qualitative data that you need to gather and understand. That data becomes information. That information then makes sense and become a shape that can be showed to a human being that then can take action on that piece and potentially see the value in his life and potentially is happy to exchange that value with a monetary value, a financial value, and actually pay you. And as a result of that, the company has revenues that to pay the employees that see the value of that money to actually generate other values. So it's a chain, and if you don't capture a piece of the chain, and you just think that you are just with that data point, you can make money. It doesn't work like that. You need to capture a part of that journey in generating value and translate the journey into some money.
So on the topic of people maybe from traditional backgrounds being necessarily scared to speak to customers and maybe even go as far as say acquiring your users, how did you two acquire? So typically I'm guessing the business model is based upon a free trial for X amount of time, with then the ability to upgrade and have certain features locked behind the paywall. That process to get maybe the first 50 or 100 so free users, how did you manage to get those into the platform? And then second, the process to convert from free to ultimately revenue generating. How's that final stage?
I think the first part of the funnel before we build a proprietary technology that I will explain you later. It's what I think Oleg can reply to that because he did a lot of work with our community.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, to reach, let's say, the first 100 customers was just a question of being part of the right communities. You know, obviously we know the crypto market, we know the kind of blockchain communities. So it was really a question of sharing, asking for feedback, doing interviews with those users, getting them on board. And we only started really charging users a few months ago. So that's been a question of, as you said, basically limiting access to some of the features and ultimately upselling based on the user signing up for the free plan with the features that solve that user.
Yeah, I mean, our strategy for upselling is really, for me, it's like teasing, like really teasing the users, like kind of giving them a little bit of product, taking it off when they actually need it, and see how is the reaction in terms of conversion. Or like, you have like some part of the feature that you can use, but then actually when you click on it, you have a paywall in front of you. So there are a lot of elements to upsell. But again, this comes when you talk to the user and understand what's valuable for you. If they say for us it's more valuable to trade the specific coin, then we make that feature a little bit limited so that we can upsell. Because then there is also an upsell that we do across the 3 plans that we have. And that's kind of an extra layers. But then after this first 100 users that really it was like basically us being nice to other people and try to get them to speak to us. And we started the first community. Then we started looking into growth marketing. That is a very nice word, very nice label. What it means, you need to basically find a way to fuck the system in order to get some users on board. And what we did, we actually we checked a lot of different techniques. We found this one that for us works very well. It is based on SEO. It's a proprietary technology that we build that generates original content on daily basis and in 7 different languages. And it generates thousands of landing pages that, in a way that we build, capture a lot of keywords. So basically, for some keywords now, we rank first position on the first page of Google. And that's actually very good because then we get now a lot of traffic through these landing pages that are very long-tailed, and all this traffic, it's for free, basically. So the only cost for us is to generate landing pages with internal resources. So it's actually a good technology that already 3 agencies, marketing agencies, asked us to sell to them as a service. We are not doing that. We are just focused on our product, but that could be also like a byproduct that in the future could become itself like a service.
Okay, guys, one final question from me. So let's imagine we're speaking to a 21, maybe a 20, 22, maybe 20 to 23-year-old version of ourselves. What advice would we give to a 22, 23-year-old version of ourselves who's currently experiencing lockdown? Maybe they have a business idea. Maybe they just have an idea. Maybe they just have a burning passion and desire to make something of their life. What things have you learned in your maybe personal, professional careers advice that you wish you knew when you were younger?
I can go on that first. So my first piece of advice would, like when I was 23, I was just starting my MPhil International Relations degree at Oxford, and I was very academic. I was ambitious, but honestly, I didn't really have a clue of how I was defining those ambitions and how to get there. I would say that if I could go back, or if I could give advice to myself back then, I would say learn coding. Let's say Python, great coding language. It would have helped me with a lot of things in the last 10 years. And I definitely would recommend that to anyone who's now 23 to pick it up, because it will open you so many doors, whether you want to build something yourself or you want to work somewhere, etc. It's just a very good way to future-proof yourself. And the other thing would have been to, in the last 10 years, I've picked up a lot of mentors, both actual as well as through books. I wish there are a lot of books. I would have discovered them earlier. I wish I had discovered, things like even we were talking about how to interview users. Books like The Mom Test from, I think, Rob Fitzpatrick. Books from Tim Ferriss. A lot of other things, also Stoicism as like a operating system for the mind. I wish I had discovered some of these things much earlier. So I would totally be there recommending to any 23-year-old to just kind of be more intellectually curious, look into more of these directions, and pick up those type of mentors, both real as well as in form of books, podcasts, etc. So learn, and then experiment.
And for me, I would say, I've always been very sales-oriented since I'm like 5 or 6, basically. At 10 years old, I was already selling used motherboards. But I would say when I was 21, maybe I would have gotten myself a generic sales job, real estate, or selling door-to-door on a side of my university activity. That would have been very, very beneficial, just starting on the cold calling, knocking at doors, and understand people from a sales process point of view. And maybe I would have said go in Silicon Valley directly, spend a few months there, maybe in the summer, and maybe study a little bit more finance back then. Yeah, because I did enjoy it. I did enjoy the business side of things and finance. But everyone arrives to a point in life through different routes, and I think for me, arriving from an artistic background was the right route for me to make me interested in these things. I approach life in a very artistic way, so otherwise I get bored very easily. That's one of my weaknesses. Now I learned that to be more disciplined, but it took time to arrive there.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time. Do you have any leaving remarks?
You guys are amazing. I really like Seed Leaguers, actually, because it's simple and it really solves a lot of our problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much, AJ, for inviting us. I really liked your questions. I think this was very interesting also even for myself to just kind of think through some of the journey I've been on.
So thank you very much. I found this lockdown time to be a great time to just reflect on journeys we've been on in the past, and maybe spend some time planning and mapping out journeys we would like to be on in the future. And I think, during this time, it's quite a somber time with many people unfortunately losing their lives, but we will see an increase in businesses, and going forwards, there's always light at the end of the tunnel, and we're going to see the way by which we interact with the world, maybe even from a working point of view, maybe a bit more remote working, fundamentally change post-coronavirus. So I'm excited for that.
We are finally in the 21st century. Finally, we're in the future. We needed this post to actually think that now after we come in the future. Exactly.
Guys, thank you so much for your time. Take care.
Thanks,
thank you.
AJ.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.